My girlfriend applied for our dream house, put her name only on the application, despite my $80,000 down payment. I found out just before closing. I said, interesting paperwork, when I refused to transfer the money and the deal collapsed, and then the air in the house smelled of fresh paint and possibility. It was the smell of our future, or so I thought. We were standing in the empty living room, the late afternoon sun slanting through the big bay window, casting long shadows on the polished hardwood floors. Chloe spun around, her arms outstretched, her laughter echoing in the cavernous space. Can you believe it, Alex? She yelled, her voice bright with a joy that felt so real, so infectious, I couldn't help but smile. This was it, the culmination of 5 years together, of late nights and careful saving. Our forever home. We'd called it that for months, ever since we first saw the listing. A charming little colonial with blue shutters and a sprawling backyard, perfect for the dog we planned to get, perfect for the kids we'd talked about having one day. It's perfect, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I walked over to her and wrapped my arms around her waist, pulling her close. She rested her head on my chest, and we stood there for a long moment, just breathing it in. The silence, the space, the feeling of standing on a threshold. My $80,000, that's what this was built on. My inheritance from my grandparents, supplemented by every spare dime I'd managed to scrape together since I started working. It was my entire net worth, the sum total of my financial life, and I was pouring all of it into this foundation, into our foundation. Chloe had a good job, but student loans and credit card debt meant she hadn't been able to save much. It didn't matter. We were a team. My money was our money. That's what I believed. That's what she'd always said. Our real estate agent, a perpetually cheerful woman named Brenda, walked in, her heels clicking smartly on the floor. Everything look good? She asked, beaming. The sellers have cleared out completely. It's all yours, pending the final signatures. She held up a thick manila folder. The closing is in an hour. Just enough time to grab a coffee and go over the final paperwork one last time. Standard procedure. We followed her to the kitchen, where she'd spread the documents out on the granite countertop. My heart was hammering in my chest, a frantic, happy rhythm. This was the final step, the finish line. Chloe picked up a pen, clicking it idly. We've been over this a million times, Brenda. I think we're good to go, she said, a little impatiently. She wanted to get to the celebration part. I understood. I did too. But this was $80,000. It was everything. I felt a duty to be diligent, to perform the role of the responsible adult one last time before we could pop the champagne. I'll just give it a quick scan, I said, reaching for the top page, the HUD-1 settlement statement. I ran my finger down the columns of numbers, the debits and credits, the fees and taxes. It all looked familiar from the drafts we'd been sent. Then I flipped to the next document, the deed, the legal instrument that would transfer ownership of this property. My eyes scanned the legalese, looking for our names. I saw the sellers' names, and then, under the section for the grantee, the new owner, I saw it, Chloe Ann Miller, a single woman. I read it again and again. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting. There had to be a mistake, a typo. I looked for my name, Alexander Vance. It wasn't there, not on the deed. I quickly flipped through the rest of the stack, the mortgage application, the promissory note, the truth in lending disclosure. Page after page, the same thing. Borrower, Chloe Ann Miller. Co-borrower, none. My name was nowhere. I was not on the title. I was not on the loan. I was a ghost. I felt a cold dread wash over me, a physical sensation that started in my stomach and spread through my limbs, leaving them feeling heavy and numb. The happy hammering in my chest had turned into a sick, slow thud. I looked up from the papers, my gaze finding Chloe's. She was watching me, her expression unreadable, a slight, tight smile playing on her lips. Brenda was busy on her phone, oblivious. Chloe, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I cleared my throat and tried again, holding up the deed. There's a mistake here. My name isn't on this. She finally broke her silence, her voice smooth as silk, utterly calm. Oh, that? It's not a mistake, sweetie. The mortgage broker said it was just cleaner this way, with my credit score being a little higher. It's just a formality. She waved a dismissive hand, as if swatting away a fly. We can add you to the title later. It's no big deal. No big deal. The words hung in the air, grotesque and absurd. My $80,000, my entire future, was no big deal. Every alarm bell in my head, every instinct I possessed was screaming. The casualness of her lie was more terrifying than any angry outburst would have been. It was practiced. I stared at her, the woman I loved, the woman I was planning to marry, and for the first time, I felt like I was looking at a complete stranger. The pieces started clicking into place with horrifying speed. The way she'd handled all the communication with the mortgage broker, the way she'd always intercepted the emails from the lawyer, saying she'd forward me the important stuff, the way she'd rushed me through signing the initial offer, saying it was a hot market and we had to move fast. It hadn't been a team effort. It had been a meticulously executed plan. My first impulse was to scream, to rage, to throw the papers in her face and demand an explanation, but some deeper, colder part of me took over, a survival instinct I didn't know I had. An explosion would give her control. It would allow her to paint me as unhinged, emotional, irrational. It would fit whatever narrative she was preparing to spin. So I did the opposite. I took a slow, deep breath. I carefully squared the papers and placed them back on the counter. I looked at her, held her gaze, and forced a small, tight smile onto my own face. Interesting paperwork, I said, my voice utterly devoid of emotion. I turned to Brenda, who was just pocketing her phone. You know, I think I have a few questions about this. I'm not quite ready to sign. The color drained beamed from Chloe's face. In that moment, she knew. She knew that I knew. And her mask of calm superiority finally, terrifyingly, slipped. Back in our apartment, the silence was a physical presence, thick and suffocating. The celebratory bottle of champagne sat on the counter, sweating, a mocking monument to a future that had just evaporated. Chloe paced the length of our small living room, her movements sharp and agitated, like a caged animal. The mask was completely gone now, replaced by a sneer of contempt. "You embarrassed me, Alex," she spat, whirling to face me. "You made me look like an idiot in front of Brenda. We had a deal." "We had a deal?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I was sitting on the edge of the sofa, my hands clasped together so tightly my knuckles were white. I was trying to anchor myself, to keep the tidal wave of rage and grief from pulling me under. "Our deal was that we were buying a house. Together. What you have there is a deal where I give you $80,000 and you get a house. That's not a deal. That's theft." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. And that's when the monologue began, the confession. The moment where the villain, confident in her victory, explains the whole brilliant plan. "It's for our own good. You know you're not good with money. You get sentimental. You'd probably want to lend half of it to your deadbeat uncle if he asked. This way, the asset is protected. The asset." She called our home the asset. It wasn't a home. It was a line item on her personal balance sheet. "My uncle," I said, incredulous. "My Uncle John, the man who had practically raised me after my father left, the kindest, most stable person I knew. What does he have to do with anything?" It was a classic tactic of hers, I realize now. Discrediting the people closest to me, isolating me. She had always made little digs about him, calling him a dreamer, saying he had no ambition because he was a high school history teacher instead of a corporate shark. I'd always defended him, but I never saw it for what it was. A strategy to sever my ties to anyone who might offer an outside perspective. "He's a perfect example," she insisted, her voice rising. "He has nothing. You have this nest egg, and you don't know how to handle it. I do. I'm securing our future. If we broke up, what would happen? You'd lose half the house in the settlement, even though I'd be the one paying the mortgage every month. This is cleaner. It's smarter. It's what any logical person would do." She said it with such conviction, such righteous indignation, that for a split second, a tiny, poisoned part of my brain wondered if she was right. It was the gaslighter's final, desperate gambit, to make you believe that their insanity is your reality. "If we broke up," I repeated, the words feeling like shards of glass in my mouth. "So you were already planning for our breakup while we were picking out paint colors?" The shock was a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. This wasn't a last-minute decision, a misguided attempt to be cleaner. This was premeditated. She had been lying to me for months, maybe years. Every "I love you," every whispered plan for the future had been a lie, a performance designed to get her hands on my money. My love for her, my trust in her, was just a resource to be exploited. I looked at her, really looked at her, and the woman I thought I knew was gone. In her place was a cold, calculating stranger with eyes like chips of ice. The grief was overwhelming. It was a death. The death of our relationship, the death of the future I'd invested everything in. I felt a sob building in my chest, a raw, ragged sound of pure agony. I collapsed back onto the couch, the strength gone from my limbs. This was it, the rock bottom. The moment I realized my entire life for the past 5 years had been built on a foundation of lies. Her face softened, but it wasn't with sympathy. It was the predatory softening of a shark that senses blood in the water. She saw my collapse as a surrender. She came over and knelt in front of me, placing a hand on my knee. Her touch felt like a brand. "It's okay, baby," she cooed, her voice dripping with false empathy. "It's a lot to take in, I know, but it's the right thing to do. Now, you just need to call the bank and authorize the wire transfer. The closing is in less than an hour. We can still make it. We can still have our house." That was it. That was the moment the grief turned to ice in my veins. She saw my pain, my utter devastation, and her only thought was about the money, the closing, the asset. She wasn't trying to comfort me. She was trying to close her deal. I stared at her hand on my knee, this alien appendage on my body, and a profound, clarifying calm washed over me. I stood up, dislodging her hand as if it were a piece of filth. I walked to the kitchen, picked up my phone from the counter, and scrolled through my contacts. "What are you doing?" she asked, a new, sharp edge of panic in her voice. "You need to call the bank, Alex. The number is in the folder." I didn't answer. I found the contact I was looking for and pressed the call button. She rushed over, trying to grab the phone from my hand. "Who are you calling? Give me that!" I turned my back to her, shielding the phone with my body. A voice answered on the other end. "Uncle John," I said, my own voice cracking but steady. "Can you come over? I need some help." The silence that followed my call to Uncle John was different. The suffocating tension had been replaced by a brittle, frantic energy radiating from Chloe. She had stopped pacing and was now standing by the window, staring down at the street, waiting. She knew what his arrival meant. It meant an outside witness. It meant the end of her ability to control the narrative in the echo chamber of our apartment. Her power was based on isolation, and that isolation was about to be breached. "You didn't have to call him," she said, her back still to me. "This is a private matter. It's between us. You're making it messy." "It got messy the moment you put only your name on a deed funded by my life savings," I retorted. The ice in my veins was holding. The shock had solidified into a cold, hard resolve. "This stopped being between us when you made it about you." She whirled around, her face a mask of fury. "I made it about us, about our future, a future that you just blew up because you couldn't handle not having your name on a stupid piece of paper." "It's not a stupid piece of paper," Chloe. It's the legal title to a $400,000 property that I was paying for. Stop pretending this is some minor detail you overlooked. The doorbell rang, a sharp, decisive chime that cut through her tirade. She flinched as if she'd been struck. I walked to the door and opened it. Uncle John stood there, his face etched with concern. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a gentle demeanor that belied his physical presence. His eyes flicked from my face to Chloe, who was standing frozen by the window, and he took in the scene in an instant. He stepped inside and closed the door softly behind him. "Alex, what's going on?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. Before I could answer, Chloe launched her preemptive strike. "Oh, thank God you're here, John," she said, rushing forward, her face a carefully constructed mask of distress. "Alex is having some kind of breakdown. We were about to close on our house, our dream house, and he just snapped. He's refusing to transfer the down payment. He's sabotaging everything." It was a masterful performance. The concerned partner worried for her unstable significant other. This was the narrative she had prepared. I was the crazy one. I was the problem. Uncle John looked at me, his expression unwavering. He'd known me my entire life. He'd seen me through teenage angst, my first heartbreak, the grief of losing my grandparents. He knew me. "Is that right, Alex?" he asked quietly. I just shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "No, that's not right." I walked back to the kitchen counter, picked up the deed, and handed it to him. "Ask her why my name isn't on this," I said. He took the paper and read it, his brow furrowed. He read it again, then looked up at Chloe. The gentle concern in his eyes had been replaced by something much harder. "Chloe," he said, his voice low and even, "why isn't Alex's name on the deed?" Chloe's performance faltered. She stammered, falling back on her earlier excuse. "The broker, he said it was cleaner for the mortgage application. It's just a temporary thing. We were going to add him later." "That's not how it works, and you know it," Uncle John said, his voice cutting through her lie with surgical precision. "Adding someone to a title after the fact is a complex process. It can trigger gift taxes. It requires the owner's consent. If you have the mortgage, the lender would also have to approve it. It's not just signing a form. You would be the sole legal owner, period." He folded the paper and placed it on the counter. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. His intervention was the final nail in the coffin of her story. Her lies couldn't stand up to his calm, factual authority. She stared at him, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. She had been outmaneuvered. "I think you should pack a bag, Chloe," Uncle John said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You need to leave." "Leave?" she shrieked, the last vestiges of her composure shattering. "This is my apartment too. You can't throw me out. The lease is in Alex's name," he stated flatly. Another fact she couldn't argue with. It was true. I had moved in a year before she did. We just never got around to adding her to the lease. It was one of the few things that was solely mine, one of the few things she hadn't managed to entangle herself in. "Pack a bag of essentials," he repeated. "You can arrange to get the rest of your things later, but you're not staying here tonight." Chloe stared at him, then at me, her eyes filled with a venomous hatred that chilled me to the bone. The stranger was back, and she was terrifying. Without another word, she stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. We heard drawers being yanked open, the sound of things being thrown into a bag. I finally let out the breath I felt like I'd been holding for an hour. I sagged against the wall, the adrenaline starting to fade, leaving a profound, aching emptiness in its wake. Uncle John put a firm hand on my shoulder. "It's over, son," he said softly. "She's not getting that money. She's not getting that house. Now the real work begins." He was right. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a whole new kind of war. The first phone call I made the next morning, after a sleepless night on the couch, was to a lawyer. Uncle John had given me the name of a man named Marcus Thorne, a shrewd, no-nonsense litigator he'd known for years. I explained the situation on the phone, my voice hollow and robotic as I recounted the events of the previous day. Marcus listened patiently, interrupting only to ask sharp, clarifying questions. "Did you ever transfer any money to her for the deposit?" "No, just the application fee, which came from our joint account." "Are there any written agreements between you? Emails, texts about the down payment?" "Yes," I said, my mind starting to clear, to focus. "Hundreds of texts. We talked about it for months. Your $80,000, my down payment. It was always clear the money was mine, for the purpose of a joint purchase." "Good," Marcus said. "Save them. Don't delete anything. Go through your records, bank statements, emails, everything. I want you to create a complete timeline of this entire house buying process, from the first viewing to yesterday's closing. Document every conversation you can remember. We need to build a fortress of evidence. Right now, you've dodged the bullet. The deal collapsed. Your money is safe, but she's not going to let $80,000 go without a fight. We need to be prepared for what she does next." That was the beginning of the great excavation. For the next week, I became an archaeologist of my own failed relationship. I sifted through the digital ruins of the life we had built together. Every email, every text message, every bank statement. It was agonizing work. Every loving message was now tainted. Every shared dream, a piece of fraudulent marketing. I saw the pattern so clearly now. The subtle ways she had taken control of our finances, insisting on managing the bills from our joint account, claiming she was more organized. The way she slowly, methodically, isolated me from friends, always having a reason why we couldn't see them, planting little seeds of doubt about their loyalty. I compiled everything into a single, massive document. A timeline cross-referenced with screenshots of texts and copies of bank records. It was a meticulous, soul-crushing process. I'd work for hours, then have to stop, overwhelmed by by a wave of grief or rage. I'd walk for miles just to burn off the furious energy, the feeling of being so utterly and completely duped. My world had shrunk to the four walls of my apartment and the endless scroll of my phone and computer screens. During this time, I also started seeing a therapist, another recommendation from Uncle John. Her name was Dr. Anya Sharma. She was a calm, insightful woman who specialized in trauma and relationship abuse. In our first session, I just talked. I poured out the whole story, the confusion, the betrayal, the profound sense of shame. Why didn't I see it? I asked, the question that had been tormenting me. How could I be so stupid? You weren't stupid, Alex, she said gently. You were in love. You were trusting. People like Chloe are experts at identifying and exploiting those qualities. They are masters of what we call coercive control. It's a slow erosion of your reality, not a sudden attack. They build a world around you where their version of events is the only one that makes sense. It's not a failure on your part that you believed in that world. It's a testament to her skill as a manipulator. Her words were a lifeline. They didn't excuse my blindness, but they reframed it. I wasn't an idiot. I was a victim of a very specific, very insidious form of abuse. It was the first step toward reclaiming my own sanity. My support network became my anchor. Uncle John called me every single day. He didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. He just listened. He'd let me vent or cry or just sit in silence on the phone if I didn't have the energy to talk. He'd show up at my door with groceries, making sure I was eating. He was my rock. I also reached out to two of my oldest friends, Mark and Sarah, whom I hadn't seen in nearly a year. Chloe had convinced me they didn't like her, that they were jealous of our happiness. I called them and, choking back my shame, told them everything. There was no judgment, no, I told you so. There was only immediate, unconditional support. We're coming over, Mark said, and an hour later, they were in my living room, one on either side of me on the couch, just being there. I had not been alone, I realized. I had only been made to feel that way. The evidence compilation was brutal, but it was also empowering. With every screenshot I saved, with every entry I made in the timeline, I felt like I was taking back a piece of my own story. This wasn't just a collection of painful memories anymore. It was ammunition. Marcus Thorne had called it a fortress of evidence, and that's what it felt like. I was building walls, not to keep people out, but to protect myself from the inevitable siege that was to come. I didn't know when or how Chloe would strike, but Marcus was certain she would. The silence from her end was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a predator, gathering its strength for the next attack. The first volley in Chloe's retaliation came about 2 weeks after she left. It was a thick, formal-looking envelope that arrived in my mailbox. My stomach clenched as I saw the return address. A law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter, a masterpiece of fiction and character assassination. It was a formal demand for $50,000, $40,000 for emotional distress and damages resulting from the collapsed real estate transaction, and $10,000 for her share of the shared household items she had left behind. The letter painted a picture of me as a volatile, emotionally unstable man who had, in a fit of irrational jealousy, maliciously sabotaged the purchase of their home at the last possible second. It mentioned my history of anxiety, a bout of mild anxiety I'd had in college after my parents' messy divorce, twisting it into a narrative of chronic mental instability. It claimed I had coercively controlled our finances, forcing her to rely on me, and that my final act of pulling the down payment was the ultimate act of financial abuse. She was flipping the script completely, accusing me of the very things she had done to me. It was breathtaking in its audacity. This is standard procedure for her personality type, Marcus said calmly when I read him the letter over the phone. The abuser plays the victim. It's called DARVO, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. She is denying her actions, attacking your character, and reversing the roles to make herself the victim. Don't panic. This is good for us. Good? I sputtered. How is this good? She's calling me a mentally unstable abuser. She's putting her narrative in writing, Marcus explained, his voice patient. And her narrative is built on a foundation of lies. Lies we can definitively disprove with the evidence you've gathered. Let her build her house of cards. It'll make it that much more satisfying when we knock it down. The second front of her attack was more personal and in many ways more painful. She began a systematic campaign to turn my own family against me. I started getting phone calls, first from my cousin, then my aunt. They had all spoken to Chloe, and they had all heard her version of the story. She had called them, crying, telling them how I had thrown her out on the street, how I had a breakdown and destroyed her dream of owning a home. She was so convincing, so seemingly heartbroken, that they believed her. Alex, what is wrong with you? My aunt's voice was sharp with disapproval. Chloe is a sweet girl. How could you do that to her? To just pull the rug out from under her like that after she put in all that work to find the perfect house for you both? I tried to explain. I tried to tell them about the deed, about the lie, but their minds were already made up. Chloe had gotten to them first. It sounds like you're not well, Alex, my aunt said, her voice dripping with condescending pity. Maybe you should get some help. Chloe had weaponized their concern, turning my own family into her unwitting agents, her enablers. The only one who remained steadfast was Uncle John. He ran interference for me, fielding calls from concerned relatives and patiently, firmly, telling them that there was much more to the story than what Chloe was telling them. You need to trust Alex, he would say. Give him the space to handle this. Most of them didn't listen, at least not at first. The lines were drawn. Team Alex consisted of me, Uncle John, Mark, and Sarah. Team Chloe Chloe was a growing legion of her family and, to my deep sorrow, a significant portion of mine. Then came the financial coercion. A week after her lawyer's letter, Chloe sent me a text directly. It was the first I had heard from her since the day she left. "This doesn't have to be this way, Alex. I miss you. I know you're hurt, but we can fix this. Just give me the 50,000 and we can both walk away and move on. No more lawyers. I'll even tell your family it was all a big misunderstanding. It was a bribe wrapped in a threat. Pay me, and I'll stop poisoning your family against you." It was emotional blackmail, pure and simple. I showed the text to my therapist, Dr. Sharma. My hands were shaking. A part of me, the part that was exhausted and just wanted the pain to stop, was tempted. $50,000 to make it all go away, to get my family back, to end the fight. "What is she offering you, Alex?" Dr. Sharma asked. "She's offering to stop abusing you in exchange for money. Is that a price you're willing to pay?" When she put it like that, the answer was clear. "No," I said, the word feeling solid and real. "No, it's not." It was a critical moment. The rock-bottom crisis had passed, and I had chosen to keep fighting. Paying her would have been an admission of guilt. It would have validated her narrative. It would have meant she had won. I forwarded the text to Marcus. His reply was immediate. "Excellent. More ammunition. Do not reply to her. All communication goes through me from now on." I blocked her number. I blocked her on every social media platform. I was building my fortress, and I was finally starting to feel safe behind its walls. The legal battleground on with the slow, grinding pace of a glacier. Marcus responded to her lawyer's demand letter with a blistering rebuttal, laying out our version of events and attaching a single damning piece of evidence, a screenshot of a text from Chloe sent 2 months prior. "Once the house is in my name, we'll be so much more secure. You won't have to worry about a thing." I had completely forgotten about it, but it was there, buried in the thousands of messages I'd archived. It was a direct contradiction of her claim that the name on the deed issue was a last-minute surprise. It proved premeditation. Her lawyer's response was silence. For weeks, we heard nothing. It was an unnerving quiet. "She's rethinking her strategy," Marcus advised. "She knows we have her on the house. She'll be looking for another angle, another point of leverage." He was right. The next move wasn't a letter. It was a process server at my door, handing me a summons. Chloe was suing me, but not just for the $50,000. She had expanded her claims. She was now demanding $100,000, claiming that over our 5-year relationship, I had promised to support her financially, a verbal contract she alleged I had broken. Furthermore, she was claiming a stake in my $80,000 inheritance, arguing that since we had planned to use it for a joint venture, she was entitled to half of it as a partner. "This is an act of pure desperation," Marcus said, looking over the lawsuit in his office. "It's a kitchen sink approach. She's throwing everything at the wall, hoping something sticks." The legal system now took over my life. The phase of depositions was scheduled. This meant I would have to sit in a conference room and be questioned under oath by her attorney, and Marcus would get to do the same to her. It was a daunting prospect. My therapy sessions with Dr. Sharma shifted focus. We worked on grounding techniques, ways to stay calm and focused under pressure, how to answer questions truthfully without offering extra information, how to handle the inevitable provocations from her lawyer. The investigative process, what Marcus called discovery, began in earnest. We sent formal requests to her lawyer for financial documents, her bank statements, credit card bills, loan applications. At first, they stonewalled, claiming the requests were overly broad and invasive. Marcus filed a motion to compel, and the judge agreed with us. 2 weeks later, several large boxes of documents arrived at his office. It was a mountain of paper. For days, Marcus, a paralegal, and I sifted through it all. It was tedious, mind-numbing work. We were looking for a needle in a haystack, a discrepancy, something that would bolster our case and destroy hers. We found it on a Tuesday afternoon. I was examining a credit card statement from a card I didn't recognize. The bills were being sent to a post office box, not our apartment, but the name on the account was mine, Alexander Vance. I had never seen this card before in my life. I had never opened an account with this bank. I felt a familiar cold dread creep up my spine. I started going through the charges, small things at first, coffee, groceries, gas, but then larger items, a designer handbag for $900, a weekend trip to a spa resort for $2,000, a $500 charge at a high-end restaurant on a night I had been working late. "Marcus," I said, my voice hoarse, "look at this." He came over and I showed him the statement. His eyes narrowed. He picked up the original application for the card, which was also in the box. He looked at the signature on the application line. It was a decent forgery, close enough to my own to pass a cursory glance, but it wasn't mine. "She opened a credit card in your name," Marcus said, his voice grim. "This is fraud. This is a felony." That single discovery was the key. It was the evidentiary turning point. We kept digging, and we found more. 2 more credit cards, with a combined debt of over $20,000. She had been paying the minimums from a secret bank account of her own, one funded by small, regular transfers from our joint account transfers she had labeled utilities or groceries in our shared budget spreadsheet. It was a shadow economy she had been running for years, right under my nose. The betrayal was deeper and darker than I could have ever imagined. The house wasn't the beginning of her plan. It was the grand finale of a long con. This discovery changed everything. We were no longer just defending against her lawsuit. We were on the attack. Marcus sat me down in his office. "We have a choice to make, Alex," he said. "We can take this evidence to the district attorney and press criminal charges for identity theft and fraud. The upside is that it would almost certainly lead to a conviction. The downside is that criminal cases can take years, and it can be an emotionally brutal process. The other option is to use this as leverage to end the civil suit. We show her lawyer what we have, and we offer her a deal. She drops her lawsuit, signs an agreement waiving all future claims against you, and in return, we don't file a criminal complaint. I thought about it for a long time. My first instinct was to burn it all to the ground. I wanted her to face a judge. I wanted her to go to jail. I wanted the world to see her for what she was. I imagined her in a courtroom, her lies exposed for everyone to see. But then I thought about what that would mean. Years, more of my life consumed by this. More depositions, a trial, appeals, more time with her occupying every corner of my mind. Dr. Sharma had told me that recovery is about moving forward, about reclaiming your life for yourself. A long, drawn-out criminal trial felt like the opposite of that. It felt like letting Chloe continue to control my life, even from a distance. What do you think we should do? I asked Marcus. My job is to give you options, not make the decision, he said. But my advice as your counsel, take the deal. A guaranteed win in the civil case that gets her out of your life forever is better than the uncertain emotional cost of a criminal trial. You get your freedom back. That's the real victory here. He was right. Justice wasn't about punishing her. It was about freeing myself. Okay, I said, a sense of finality settling over me. Let's do it. Let's make the offer. Marcus nodded, a thin smile on his lips. Good choice, he said. Now, let's go end this. The strategy was set. We weren't just defending anymore. We were holding a tactical nuke, and her entire case was at ground zero. The day of the settlement conference felt like a final exam for my soul. It wasn't a trial, but it was a formal hearing in a conference room at the courthouse, presided over by a retired judge acting as a mediator. Chloe was there, sitting on the opposite side of a long mahogany table. She wouldn't look at me. She sat ramrod straight, whispering to her lawyer, a portly man with a perpetually smug expression. My team was me, Marcus, and Uncle John, who had insisted on coming for moral support. His solid, calming presence at my side was an anchor in the turbulent sea of my anxiety. I was terrified. Despite all my preparation with Dr. Sharma, my heart was pounding, and my palms were sweating. I had to face her. I had to sit in a room with the person who had systematically dismantled my life and my sanity, and I had to remain calm. I focused on my breathing, on the feeling of my feet flat on the floor, on the solid wood of the chair beneath me. Grounding techniques. Stay in the present. Don't let her pull you into the vortex of the past. The mediator began the proceedings, his voice a droning monotone. Her lawyer went first, launching into a passionate, theatrical summary of their case. He painted Chloe as the wronged party, a woman whose trust had been betrayed, whose dreams had been shattered by my erratic and cruel behavior. He talked about her emotional devastation, the financial hardship she had endured. It was a compelling work of fiction. I could feel my anger rising, a hot flush crawling up my neck. I wanted to scream, to object, to call him a liar. I glanced at Marcus, who gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Not yet. Then it was my turn to speak. The mediator turned to me. Mr. Vance, would you like to respond? My throat was dry. All eyes in the room were on me. I took a sip of water, my hand trembling slightly. I looked directly at the mediator, avoiding Chloe's gaze. Yes, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. What her lawyer just described is not what happened. I began to tell my story. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. I just stated the facts, calmly and methodically, as Marcus and I had rehearsed. I talked about our relationship, about saving the $80,000, about our agreement to buy a house together. When I got to the part about the closing, about discovering my name was not on the deed, Chloe's lawyer interrupted. Objection. This is a self-serving narrative. The document in question was a simple clerical matter that could have been easily rectified. Let him finish, the mediator said, waving a dismissive hand at the lawyer. I continued. I described her confession, her admission that it was planned. I talked about her lawyer's demand letter, her lawsuit, her attempts to characterize me as mentally unstable. I laid out the timeline of her lies. Then, it was Marcus's turn. He stood up, holding a thin file folder. Mr. Mediator, he said, his voice crisp and authoritative. My client's narrative is not self-serving. It is supported by a mountain of evidence. Evidence that not only refutes every single claim made by Miss Miller, but also paints a much darker picture of her conduct during their relationship. He turned to Chloe's lawyer. I believe you were sent a copy of this evidence last week. The evidence of felony fraud and identity theft committed by your client against mine. A dead silence fell over the room. Chloe's lawyer's smug expression vanished, replaced by a look of genuine shock. He clearly hadn't reviewed the file Marcus had sent. He'd underestimated us. He'd assumed it was a bluff. Chloe, for the first time, looked directly at me. Her eyes were wide with panic. She knew exactly what Marcus was talking about. The secret credit cards, the forged signatures. The carefully constructed world of her lies was about to be publicly detonated. Marcus walked over to the table and laid out the documents one by one. Exhibit A, a credit card application in my client's name with a forged signature. Exhibit B, the statements for that card showing over $7,000 in debt your client accrued without my client's knowledge or consent. Exhibit C, a second credit card application. Exhibit D, Exhibit E, he continued, his voice a steady, damning litany. He presented the bank statements showing the secret transfers, the P.O. box receipts, the forged checks. It was an avalanche of irrefutable proof. The mediator picked up one of the credit card statements and looked at it, then then at Chloe. Her face had gone chalk white. Her lawyer was shuffling papers, his face flushed, utterly flummoxed. He had come in for a routine settlement conference and found himself in the middle of a criminal expose. "Miss Miller," the mediator said, his voice now laced with ice, "is this your signature on this application?" He was pointing at my name. She couldn't speak. She just shook her head, a tiny, jerky movement. It was the weakest, most pathetic lie she had ever told, and no one in the room believed it. Marcus let the silence hang for a moment before delivering the final blow. "My client has been the victim of a calculated long-term campaign of financial and emotional abuse," he said, his voice resonating with cold fury. "This lawsuit is not just baseless, it is a continuation of that abuse. It is an attempt to extort money from the man she has been systematically defrauding for years." He paused, then looked directly at Chloe. "We are here today to offer you a one-time deal. You will drop this frivolous lawsuit immediately. You will sign a binding agreement, waiving any and all present and future claims against Mr. Vance, financial or otherwise. You will agree to a permanent no-contact order. In exchange for your signature on that agreement, my client will agree not to forward this evidence to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution." The offer hung in the air, brutal and absolute. Checkmate. Chloe's lawyer, finally recovering his senses, leaned over and began whispering furiously in her ear. She was shaking, her eyes darting between him, the mediator, and me. The mask was gone. The confident narcissist was gone. All that was left was a common thief caught red-handed. After a few agonizing minutes, her lawyer straightened up. "My client accepts the terms," he mumbled, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. The verdict was bittersweet. There was no gavel slam, no jury declaring her guilty. Justice arrived quietly, in the form of a legal document slid across a table. I watched as Chloe, her hand trembling, signed her name at the bottom of the settlement agreement. It was a declaration of her defeat and my freedom. She signed away her right to ever contact me again, to ever make a claim on my life or my money. She signed, and then, without a word, she stood up and walked out of the room, her lawyer trailing behind her like a kicked dog. She was gone. As the door closed behind her, a profound wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. It was over. The war was over. Uncle John put his arm around my shoulders. "You did it, Alex," he said, his voice thick with pride. "You faced the dragon, and you won." I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory parade. It felt like surviving a shipwreck. I was alive. I was on solid ground, but the wreckage of my past life was still visible, floating in the water around me. The legal victory was absolute, but the emotional justice felt incomplete. The system had forced her to let go of me, but it couldn't erase the scars she had left behind. In the weeks that followed the settlement, I wrestled with that feeling of incomplete justice. I discussed it at length with Dr. Sharma. "The legal system can give you restitution, Alex, but it can't give you restoration," she explained one afternoon. "It can't restore the trust you lost or the years you spent in a state of deception. The verdict in the courtroom is an external event. The verdict on your own life, on your own healing, is an internal one. That's the one you have control over now." Her words helped me reframe my perspective. The goal wasn't to erase what had happened, because that was impossible. The goal was to integrate the experience, to learn from it, and to build a new life on a foundation that I alone controlled. The first step was practical. I changed my bank accounts. I put fraud alerts on my credit reports. I worked with the credit card companies, armed with the signed settlement and a letter from Marcus, to have the fraudulent accounts closed and the $20,000 of debt removed from my name. Each step was a small act of reclamation, of cleaning up the debris left by the storm. I took my $80,000, which had been sitting in a high-yield savings account, untouched, and moved it to a new bank, one Chloe didn't even know existed. Seeing that balance, safe and secure, felt like a quiet triumph. It was no longer a symbol of betrayal. It was a symbol of my survival. The second step was emotional. I had to deal with the fallout within my family. Uncle John helped me draft a carefully worded email to the relatives who had taken Chloe's side. I didn't gloat. I didn't say, "I told you so." I simply stated the facts of the legal outcome, that Chloe had dropped her $100,000 lawsuit in exchange for my agreement not to press felony fraud charges, and that a permanent no-contact order was now in place. I attached a copy of the final settlement agreement. I didn't ask for an apology. I just laid out the truth and let it speak for itself. Some of them called. My aunt was the first. Her voice was small, full of shame. "Alex, I am so sorry. I had no idea." She was so convincing. I accepted her apology, but with a newfound sense of reserve. The easy, unconditional trust I once had in them was gone, replaced by a more cautious understanding. They were not bad people, but they had been willing to believe the worst of me based on the word of a manipulator. That was a lesson I wouldn't forget. Our relationships could be repaired, but they would be different. They would have boundaries they never had before. Rebuilding my life meant rebuilding my home. The apartment that had once been our shared space was now filled with ghosts. Every corner held a memory, now tainted. With Uncle John's help, I spent a weekend packing up every last trace of her. The clothes she'd left, the books, the little decorative items she'd picked out. We boxed it all up and put it in storage, with a message sent through her lawyer about where she could retrieve it. Then, Mark and Sarah came over with paint rollers and buckets of paint. We spent the whole weekend repainting the living room and bedroom, blasting music and ordering pizza. We painted over the old colors, the colors Chloe had chosen. With every stroke of the roller, it felt like I was erasing her, painting a blank canvas for my own future. The permanent boundaries were the most crucial part of my new beginning. The legal no contact order was the iron wall, but I had to build my own internal walls as well. I committed myself to therapy, to understanding the vulnerabilities in myself that Chloe had exploited, not to blame myself, but to strengthen my defenses, my desire to please, my tendency to avoid conflict, my naive belief in the inherent goodness of someone I loved. These weren't character flaws, but they were traits I needed to manage with more awareness. I learned to say no. I learned that my feelings and my financial security were not negotiable. I learned that a healthy relationship is one between two whole individuals, not one person propping up another. About a year later, I was sitting in my living room, the one with the new coat of soft gray paint. The afternoon sun was slanting through the window, the same way it had in that empty house a lifetime ago. The $80,000 was still in the bank, growing, waiting. Not for a house, not yet, just waiting for me. I was in no rush. The frantic need to build a future with someone else had been replaced by a quiet contentment in building a life for myself. The scars were still there. A flicker of doubt when I met someone new, a twinge of phantom pain when I saw a house with blue shutters. They were a part of me now, a reminder of the price of trust, but they no longer defined me. I thought about Chloe sometimes, not with anger or hatred anymore, but with a kind of clinical detachment. I hoped she would get help, but I knew I was not responsible for her salvation. My responsibility was to myself, to honor the fight I had endured, to protect the peace I had won. The closing image of my old life was me, standing in that empty house, my world collapsing. The closing image of this chapter was me, sitting in my own apartment, in the quiet sunlight, whole and at peace. I had survived, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, completely, and securely at home. My home, built on a foundation that no one could ever take away from me again.